There we go. All right, we are going to jump into this rather quickly. I think I've pressed all the right buttons. Good afternoon, Elizabeth. Are we good to go? Are we all set? I think so. Testing, 1, 2, yep. Welcome. Okay. All right, friends. I feel a little bit on fire today in the most delightful ways, so I'm super excited to do this. Let's go. Welcome. This is Holding Space for Love to Be Seen. My name is Tiger, and what I do is share insight and wisdom that helps people see beyond the noise in the mind and connect with reality as it is. And naturally, as we do that, what we continue to see time and time again is that in reality, beyond all the noise, is an abundance of love, compassion, and freedom. So we're going to hang out here for the next hour. I'm going to speak to the topic for today, sharing some thoughts, some feelings, some things to expose a discovery. And I'm going to have to do a disclaimer about this one, but we'll get into that after the format, which is the intro happening now. Then we're going to do 2 minutes of stillness, which is where I don't say anything. I just allow myself to be present. I know it can be kind of weird to watch something where there's just 2 minutes of no talking, but we're going to do it. It's an important part of the program, at least for me. From that stillness, I'm going to run my mouth for about 30 to 40 minutes on the topic. Then we got some time for some Q&R, questions and reflections from the live audience, folks watching from all over the world. And then we'll end with a super short and sweet guided meditation to wrap it up nicely. All right, let's jump into the 2 minutes of stillness starting right now. Beautiful. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. Oh my goodness. We get to do it again. This is episode 37. And in the spirit of play, I'm going to do something that I haven't done yet. I'm going to try something out. And I don't know if I'm going to do it again, but I feel inspired to do it this time. So I wrote the pre-broadcast reflections for this episode, the title of which is Suffering Really an Illusion? Yes, comma, but, ... And in writing the pre-broadcast reflections, I was so thrilled to see how it unfolded, what I wrote down. To the point where it's like, this is kind of a fantastic outline to go over in the video. So I feel like this could be cool because even in the pre-broadcast reflections, I wrote a bunch of bullet points to kind of help break this down. And so I'm wondering if I took this time to go through that reflection and then maybe offer some additional insights. And as always, I guess, especially if you're really into this program, getting that pre-broadcast reflection, I think, is such a great opportunity to prepare the heart and mind for going into this topic. So in the spirit of that as well, let's also just do a brief disclaimer. And this is for the people who are watching. Maybe it's your first time. You don't understand my flavor. But here's the thing, okay? I'm playing. This is my play. This isn't serious for me. I'm not trying to suggest that I'm right, other people are wrong. What I'm doing is looking at my own direct experience, being fascinated with the degree of the insanity that goes on in here. And I like to discern the difference between what I imagine to be happening and what is really happening, while also exploring the human condition being my human condition. And I share that. And I understand that it seems like I'm talking about other people. It seems like I might be talking about your experience. When I say you, I'm actually talking to myself. When I say we, I'm talking about the different parts of myself. When I say human beings, I'm talking about the one human being that I know, which is what I am. And so I know it might look like I'm teaching something. I know it might sound like I'm talking about other people, but just to be clear, I'm not. You all are free to see what you see, have your own exploration, and if what I'm saying resonates, fantastic. If not, no worries. This is all play. Okay, disclaimer done. Let's carry on. The topic today is suffering really an illusion? And I was inspired to speak on this topic because I've been doing a lot of writing on the internet, and as it goes, there's always a major misunderstanding. People assume I'm saying things that I'm not saying at all, and then people get their butt hurt based on what they think I'm saying, and it just kind of creates this whirlwind of confusion for the person that maybe want to understand what I'm saying. So this is always just such a great opportunity to clarify a little bit where I'm coming from and what I'm pointing to, so that you might see the profound nature of what I'm exploring. And one of those things is the nature of suffering that I talk about a lot, and its illusionary nature and how it's self-created and how it doesn't come from the outside, which is the automatic assumption that I'm suffering because of what's happening. I'm suffering because of XYZ circumstance. And if only XYZ circumstance wasn't happening, then I wouldn't be suffering, which implies that I am a prisoner to circumstance. It implies that I cannot be at peace unless the outside does what I think it should do. And that's just a terrible strategy for living with peace. Again, talking to myself. So I want to break down a little bit as a way of pointing how it is that suffering is illusionary. And maybe this will give us a bit of insight into our own experience about how we can release the world, release what we think is happening, and get more in touch with the heart and reality of what we are, which will ultimately alleviate the intensity of suffering that we're having. So let me kind of improvise as I go through this pre-broadcast reflection. And if you're not reading these and would like to, then get in touch with us. I start off asking the question, is suffering really an illusion? Well, let's playfully ask some follow-up questions to lightly explore. Is suffering an illusion if the person who is suffering is also an illusion? Just something to consider. If a character in a movie is suffering, is their suffering an illusion? If I suffer in my dream as I sleep, am I suffering over something? And I'm suffering over something that's not really happening. Is that suffering an illusion? In my dream as I sleep, am I suffering? Or is the character of me in the dream suffering? Furthermore, two playful questions. If I'm suffering over the title of this video, meaning I'm offended that someone might suggest that suffering is an illusion, is my suffering really about what I think or imagine it's about? Or is my suffering to suffer over my thinking / imagination? And I think that, man, these opportunities to discover are just so right in our face. And I love that last question of if I'm offended about the title of this post. I mean, and let's playfully imagine, even if you're not the one, imagine that you read this title suggesting that suffering is an illusion and you experience being offended. And being offended is a flavor of suffering, meaning that there's an emotional disturbance that doesn't seem to allow for joy, that doesn't seem to allow for peace. Right? There's some sort of internal agitation that says all is not well. And you can see the knee-jerk reaction that believes I'm experiencing that emotional disturbance because of what this dude is saying. Which also says that dude is responsible for my suffering. What that person wrote is responsible for me being offended. That is the illusion. And in one way, this seems so profoundly obvious, but again, I can also understand where it might not seem obvious. But I think it's paramount to see just how illusionary that is. That to experience the disturbance of being offended, I assume that that disturbance is created by that thing out there. And that's not really what's happening. First and foremost, to say I'm offended by the title comes with enormous amounts of assumptions about what I mean when I say that. And it believes those assumptions. It believes that I'm saying what you think I'm saying, and I'm not. It assumes that what you think it means is what I'm saying it means. It does not. And so if I'm suffering over what someone's saying, am I suffering over what they're saying, or am I suffering over what I think it means? Which is suffering over my creation. And do you see how this is so much more true than saying that I'm suffering over what they said, or I'm suffering over what this video is called? Now, you'll notice this as well. The more I think I'm suffering over that thing out there, the illusion, the more I suffer. The more powerless I am. The more I am a victim of that which is beyond my control. The more I recognize that I'm suffering over my own creation, it immediately de-intensifies the suffering. Immediately. And why is this? Well, in one way, it's because when I see myself as separate from the thing I'm suffering over, like it's out of my control, there's an intensity of fear. When I see that it's within what I am, what is there to be afraid of? Meaning there's much less fear. It's like to recognize that I'm suffering over my own creation almost implies there can be a different creation, right? The power is still within what I am. And if anything, there's just an innocent misunderstanding. It's like it's infinitely more manageable. It's manageable in a real way as opposed to trying to manage something that's beyond my control, which is also why we tend to get so violent when we're suffering. Because we're seeking to gain control over that which we don't have control over in order to remedy our suffering. Oh, this is brilliant. You'll notice this, that when there's confusion, a belief in the illusion about suffering, there's a violence that emerges that wants to withhold freedom from the thing that I think is at fault for my suffering. For example, if I'm feeling offended over what that person is saying, then I want to withhold freedom from their ability to say what they say. Isn't that a popular thing to do nowadays? I'm offended by what you're saying, therefore you shouldn't be able to say what you're saying, which is to withhold freedom from you to be you, which is also to withhold love. You see, this massive misunderstanding results in the withholding of freedom for all of life. And whether you have this argument with what somebody says, with what somebody does, you'll find that you even have that argument with life as a whole. Life will be life and you'll suffer, and you think you're suffering because life is being life. And so you try to exert some sort of control/violence over life, saying life shouldn't be life because it's making me suffer. But that's the illusion. And how's that going, by the way? To try and control that which is outside of you in an effort to resolve suffering. I know how it's going. It's not going well. Further on this reflection, I took a brief moment to clarify terms, so to speak, to clarify what I mean when I say illusion and clarify what I mean when I say suffering. Because again, we can have all sorts of assumptions about what these things mean and also assuming that I mean what you think I mean when I use these words. So, playfully, illusion. Something that appears to be real and true, but is not. Real and true in the context of being based or grounded in reality. Reality behind and beyond the mind's imagination about reality. This is so foundational, and it's what I spend a vast majority of my time pointing to. Discern the difference between what you think is happening and what is really happening. This is spirituality. To see beyond the mind's assumptions, to see beyond the mind's conditioning, to see beyond what you think you know, and get in touch with what you really know. To get in touch with what's real and what's true. And it's in this space that it resolves all emotional disturbances, which is also to say, to see the truth of life heals everything. And it's doubly amazing because every human has this capacity to see more clearly, to see beyond the illusion. Suffering. What do I mean when I say suffering? A painful emotional state that is characterized by the fearful opposition to what appears to be happening. The emotional distress is always rooted in the fear of losing one's sense of self or sense of personal identity, which is why suffering is often felt like a form of dying in varying degrees. I love that definition. So often we equate suffering to experiences of physical pain. We equate suffering to certain circumstances. For example, we can say someone is suffering the loss of a job. But I would say that's not really accurate. We're not suffering the happening of one's end of employment. We're suffering what we think that means, which will always relate to a loss of self-worth and value, right? Coming back to it being rooted in a personal sense of self. And then likewise, another person can lose the same job and it's seen entirely differently as an opportunity to finally do something that you enjoy doing. So there's no suffering at all. And then also with like physical pain does not require suffering. And again, this is monumental. We automatically assume that if there's physical pain, there must be suffering. Sure, physical pain hurts. Sure, physical pain is unpleasant. But that doesn't mean one has to suffer. Put it this way. The most painful part of pain is the story wrapped around the pain. And I invite you to explore this for yourself, that when something hurts, the more you think this is an inconvenience, the more you think this pain is in your way, the greater the intensity of the pain. The more the pain is simply allowed to be the pain, without it being an interruption at all, the less the pain. It doesn't necessarily mean no pain, even though that can happen as well. Where when one falls into an immense embrace of what's showing, we start to realize that actually this doesn't hurt at all, or this doesn't hurt nearly as much as I thought it did. And so look in that direction. That pain and suffering are not the same thing. And furthermore, to add clarification, there's a profound similarity in physical pain and then emotional pain. And I'll just touch on this. I think there was another episode on this, but physical pain is an alarm that says there's something out of alignment that needs your attention. If you touch a hot stove, which I have a little bit of a scar here from last week where I removed something from the oven and my wrist touched something super hot. And there was an immediate reaction of pain that tried to get my attention, that said, hey, come back to reality, come back to this moment. There's something happening that does not support wellness. And so this alarm of pain is trying to help me so that I can continue on in wellness, right? There's an intense pain here. It says, look here, please. Alarm, 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 right? There's something going on that needs your loving attention so that you can continue on in wellness. And the pain is temporary as long as I address the issue. And if I don't address the issue, the pain continues and the pain intensifies. This is brilliant. This is part of life's brilliant conscious design that supports me being in wellness. As such, the experience of physical pain is an expression of love. It's there to support me, to support my wellness. How silly it would be to argue with the pain. How silly it would be to think life made a mistake. How silly it would be to be in opposition to the way of life and that there's something called pain. Because without the pain, my hand would stay on the hot surface and simply get worse and worse and worse. And so the pain helps me minimize the damage. How does this relate to emotional pain? So much so. Let's talk briefly about the function of suffering. Because it's just as brilliant as physical pain in the way that it's an extension of love that looks to support your overall wellness. Just like physical pain, emotional pain acts as an alarm that tries to get your attention. Emotional pain, if you look at the mechanism of emotion, emotion is responding to perception. Meaning that I feel in accordance to how I see. And this is part of the fundamental misunderstanding about being human, is we think our emotions are responding to what's happening out there. No, your emotions are responding to how you see out there. And so if there's emotional pain, there's an alarm that's trying to get your attention that says the way that you're seeing is not in alignment with wellness, which is also to say the way you're seeing is not in alignment with the truth of what you are. And if you continue to perceive in that way, it's a great disadvantage to your human experience. There's a whole host of issues that arise when you see yourself as less than, when you see yourself as undeserving, when you see yourself as missing something, right? When you see yourself in all of these ways that simply are not true, that greatly limits the wellness of your experience. And so there's an emotional pain response that invites you to come back to the present moment and clarify what it is you think is happening. Because again, the emotional disturbance is responding to what you think is happening. And the pain is saying that what you think is happening isn't really what's happening. That's not true. And so just like the physical pain, it shuts you down so that you can come back and collect yourself and give loving attention where loving attention is needed. And you'll notice this, that when there's emotional suffering, you don't function very well in the world. It's difficult to go forward. And that's important because there's something that needs to be clarified. And this is for my own benefit. It's helping me. Now, if I see that suffering is in the way, like it shouldn't be there, I resist it, I'm in opposition to it, that is a further misperception which only amplifies the suffering. In addition to that, to resist it, to not want to experience it, is to also say, I don't want to see the lesson. I don't want to see what this is trying to teach me. And this plays right back into the human misunderstanding about life in general, that thinks the point is to get to the future. And so it thinks that suffering is in its way of getting to the future, and it just becomes a disaster. But the point of being human, the point of being alive, is to be alive right now. And if you're not in a space of wellness, if you're not moving in alignment with the truth of things now, you're going to get a pain signal that tries to get your attention to bring you back into an alignment because that's what you really want anyway. And so to recognize this, it also recognizes that the play of suffering is right on time, that it's not misplaced. It's there to help. It's there to inform, which dramatically transforms one's relationship with suffering. That, oh, okay, if this is showing, then it's actually here to help me. It's not in the way at all, which is a profound state of openness. And in that state of openness, you see so much more than if you're in a state of opposition that essentially says, I don't want to look at it. And so, of course, you can't see the lesson. Okay. Moving on. I mentioned in this reflection, to make the case that suffering is an illusion, I just want to add that this is all incredibly playful for me and not serious. There are two aspects that are illusionary and one aspect that is not. And FYI, I'm making all this up, so don't take it seriously. Illusion one, the fearful opposition of what appears to be happening. As I examine my experience of suffering, what I recognize is that I'm not opposing reality. I'm opposing my thoughts about reality. My thoughts are imagination. And sometimes that imagination looks like reality, but still, looking like reality is not reality. It's an illusion. My suffering is responding to the illusions I create about reality. Do you ever notice this? Like, let's go back to the example of being offended. I can say, I'm in opposition to what you said, right? Like, I'm in opposition to reality, the reality of what you said. No, I'm in opposition to what I think you're saying. I'm in opposition to my dream of reality, which is quite fascinating because you think you're in opposition to what's happening, but no, you're in opposition to what you think is happening. Right? Do you see how that's all just playing out in the realm of illusion, which is interesting because it shows you that you're not really ever in opposition to life. You're not ever in opposition to what's real and true. The opposition is a misunderstanding. It's focused on the illusion, assuming that the illusion is true, which again, sometimes it looks like it's true in the same way that if you're offended by what I said, it really seems like you're offended by what I said. But is that really what's happening? No. But again, I totally get that it can look like that. Illusion 2, fear of losing one's sense of self. Again, to examine my own experience of suffering, it always revolves around who I think I am. I'm suffering over what I think is happening to me. Yet, this me is a character I created in the mind. The more deeply I examine what's really happening beyond the stories I tell, I see that in reality, there is nothing happening to what I really am. Or maybe better stated as, I'm taking something personally that's not really personal. The second illusion is who I think I am. It's this character that suffers. This illusion of me that suffers. The reality of what I am does not suffer, has never suffered, and will never suffer. I simply have dreams of myself suffering. I can understand if that's a stretch, but I invite you to inquiry into that. Has what you really are ever suffered in reality? Or is it the character suffering, who you think you are? And sure, it might express itself on the surface. You might have snot running out the nose. You might be bawling your eyes out. And yes, maybe that looks like you, but is that really you? And I love this point about it's the character of who I am that thinks something is happening to the character. And then the character suffers over what it thinks is happening, right? For example, again, back to being offended. To be offended, I'm taking something personally, right? I'm hearing what you're saying and I think it's about me. And again, suffering will always come back to the me, who you think you are. And this gets really twisted, where you said something, I think I'm being offended because of what you said. I'm taking it personally. But I'm actually suffering over what I think you said, and I'm taking my thoughts personally. So I'm not even taking what you said personally. I'm taking my own thoughts personally, thinking that it's about me. I'm literally attacking myself with my own thoughts. Hello? You guys hearing this? I'm literally attacking myself with my own thinking. Of course it hurts. It's so wildly untrue. It's so wildly a disservice to your own inherent worth and value to do that nonsense. And in our human confusion, this happens so much. And in the misunderstanding, we think it's coming from the outside when it's really coming from the inside. Okay, not illusion, part 3. Yes, there is the experience that we call suffering. Just as there is the experience of being wet or being hungry, there is the reality of emotion. There is the reality of a human being experiencing him or herself. There is the reality of perceiving, such as the reality of what I am looking at in life, circumstances, and telling stories about it. Right? Yes, all that's happening. Yes, there is something called suffering. But the question here is, what's really going on? Because there's a lot of illusions happening that we are mistaking for reality. And mistaking illusions for reality is at the source of suffering. Which is fantastic news to realize that I'm not suffering because of what I thought I was suffering about. Which means I can let go of the world. Which means I can let go of other people. And I can come back to the heart of what I am and clarify the misunderstanding that's only seeing myself as less than. A misunderstanding that simply isn't seeing the truth of what I am. Okay, I'm just going to run through these common misconceptions about what I'm suggesting. Common misperception 1. To assume that I'm saying suffering is wrong or that we should not suffering. No, not saying that. This has nothing to do with what the mind thinks is right or wrong or should not be. Number 2. Because suffering is an illusion, it's not valuable. Nope, not saying that either. The experience of suffering is very much part of the human experience. And it serves as an important teacher. To resist or reject suffering only creates more suffering. Third assumption. Other people's suffering is an illusion. Nope. I'm not saying that. I'm only talking to myself. My suffering is an illusion, and I see that very, very clearly. Other people can have their own experiences. Again, I'm not here to define that for anyone else. I'm sharing what I see in my experience. This is important. Okay. That was fun to go through that pre-broadcast reflection with you. I like that format. Who knows if I'll do it again. But you guys should let me know too if you like it that way. Because maybe we can play like that again. What's next? Questions and reflections. Now is the time to type some questions if you got some questions, and I can speak to those. Jojo asks, how do you work with your thoughts? She says, I use inquiry, the work of Byron Katie. Great process to dive into what you're speaking to. Yeah, absolutely. If you're asking me, how do I work with my thoughts? In the same spirit of that compassionate self-inquiry, I like to hold a space for thoughts where they're completely allowed to be what they are so that I can see them clearly. If I'm resisting thoughts, it says I don't want to see them. And I'm curious about them. And so it's really, really beautiful where it's like there's not a fear of the thoughts. It's an invitation to ask, okay, what does this thought believe in order to be this thought? And is that true? And then just a straightforward curiosity. I think that's part of my characteristic, is to just be so incredibly curious. Like, what's really happening here? I see what I think is happening. I see that. Okay, what's happening beyond what I think is happening? And that gives me an entirely different perspective. A perspective that isn't bound by the limitation of the mind. It's willing to see beyond the mind. And so it's not so much that I'm even thinking about the thinking. There's just an openness that lets it be. And then something profound shows itself in that emptiness. Question, I would love some examples of what to do instead of suffering. That's great. What to do instead of suffering. This reminds me to consider where the question comes from. Like, am I trying to avoid the suffering that's there? Because again, a lot of this isn't so much about stopping suffering, because that most likely is going to come with a subtle attempt to manipulate or control it, rather than understand it. And so if suffering is there, suffering is there. And again, it's a teacher. It's there to help. And so maybe the point isn't to do something else if suffering is what's happening. And again, if suffering is there, it means there's a profound discovery that allows for more love to flow. And so maybe doing the suffering is the perfect thing to be doing if suffering is the thing that's happening. As one understands the suffering, sees what it's trying to teach, then when the message is received, then there doesn't need to be suffering anymore. And so to allow the suffering to be the suffering will resolve itself. Now, in our human tendency, we have so many strategies for avoiding suffering, numbing suffering, distracting ourselves from suffering. And then the suffering just kind of lingers and hangs out, waiting for our attention. And we just pretend like it's not there. And so people are going to be at different places in this journey as it relates to their relationship with suffering. And I love that that's part of the focus here. It's not so much about what to do or where to go, because where to go and what to do can come from so many different places. The real question here is, what's your relationship with it? How are you relating with what's showing? Do you see it as an enemy? Do you see it as in the way? How do you see it? And is how you see it in alignment with what's real and true? And a very quick way to determine that is there any agitation? Are you disturbed? Because again, that emotional response of disturbance is an alarm that says, I'm not seeing this clearly, which is quite interesting again, because when we're emotionally disturbed, underneath that is a current of blame. It's blaming that something. And as it's blaming that something, it's also saying, I don't want to understand you. I want you to go away. Which is also saying, I don't want to listen. I don't want to see more clearly. I want it the way that I want it. Which is a recipe for disaster. Amanda says, let's say I understand everything you say theoretically and agree 100%, but how to handle it practically? For example, if the emotions are physical, for me, I can get direct physical sensations when I'm in a bad argument with someone. For example, I start to cry. My stomach feels like a stone, and it's just so strong physically for a long time, maybe for a whole day. What should I do with it if the body wants to cry and can't stop it? How to handle it? You know, this is interesting. Because it's like, in one way, I hear you asking, the body wants to cry. How do I control it? Rather than just letting it cry. I feel like there's a stone in my stomach. How do I make it go away? Rather than embracing it feels like there's a stone in my stomach. Right? Do you see how we can see these things as in the way? Like, oh no, I want to cry. Something's wrong. Oh no, I want to cry. How do I not cry? Why are we assuming that these things are in the way? Is it possible that these things are the way? And we don't like them because they don't support our fantasy. They don't support our dream. Which is the thing about reality, is it doesn't give a shit about your dream. Let's be aware of this. Playfully speaking. Are we trying to control? Or are we looking to understand? Are we trying to be crafty in our way of getting around something so that we can appear to be spiritual? Or are we falling into the reality of our human experience and allowing the human to be the human, finally? Because again, understand, the big difficulty in being human is the idea that it's not okay to be human. It's like saying the human wants to cry, but that's not socially acceptable, so I probably shouldn't cry. Which is to deny the authenticity of what I am. Follow up from Amanda, yes, but how do I accept the physical sensations and not follow it? So to become a bad circle. Because the sensation leads to bad thoughts and then it's more suffering. Ah, beautiful, beautiful. You say the sensations lead to bad thoughts. So we're saying it's because of the sensation that I have bad thoughts. Is that true? Which is like saying it's cold outside and it makes me irritated. Is that true? The cold is uncomfortable, so it makes me hate myself. Is it true that the cold put those thoughts in you? Is it true that the sensation made you think you're not enough? Or is it the assumption that the sensation is in the way, which leads you to think something's wrong with you? Right? This is a question about relationship. How are you relating with the sensation? For me, that's the real lesson. It's not how do I control it, right? To accept it isn't to accept it so it goes away. That's not accepting it. That's trying to manipulate it. I'm going to accept you so that you go away. That's not acceptance. Accepting it is realizing that it's not to be blamed. Accepting it is realizing that it's innocent. Can you see this? Accepting the sensations in the body is realizing that the sensation isn't making you suffer. It's my own misunderstanding that's creating the suffering, not the sensation. The sensation doesn't have that power to make you suffer. The sensation doesn't have that power to make you think you're less than. You can try and give it that power, but it doesn't want that power and it can't have that power. You can just simply give your power away. Yummy. Okay, we're going to wrap up and exit with a short guided meditation. You ready for that? Let's just jump right into it. Let's go. We're going to take some moments here and allow ourselves to connect with reality beyond all of our illusions about reality. Let's allow ourselves to just be present for a moment. All the scattered pieces, inviting them back to right now. We can allow the breath to guide us home. The breath is here right now. Just be here with me. I want to invite you to recognize something in this space. Maybe you're open to see it. Maybe not, and that's fine. Can we acknowledge that everything we might be suffering about is suffering over content in the mind? Everything that creates agitation, emotional disturbance, is to assume that the mind's content is actually happening in reality? But yet in reality, here, right now, none of that is actually happening. Just gently see that. There's the world going on in the mind. Thinking, thinking, thinking. Much, if not all of which, is thinking you're not enough. Thinking something went wrong. Life made a mistake. But yet, the more we come back to this moment, there is a wellness waiting to emerge. A wellness that recognizes you're okay. Sure, sometimes things are confusing. Sometimes life seems really hard. Sometimes it really looks like something is missing. I get that. But what about right now? Even if you're sad, is it wrong that you're sad? Is that a mistake? Sure, you can think it is. But is there anything in life saying that you should not be as you really are? Or is that just another misunderstanding in the mind? Let's breathe in to this moment. Let's be here now. Just breathe. Isn't it fascinating how the mind thinks there's so much happening, and yet there's just this? Even if there's noise, there's a silence underneath it all. Even if there's commotion, there's a stillness that holds it all. Even if there appears to be chaos, there's a peace that allows it all. But only right here and right now. Just breathe. Thank you for meditating with me today. Now go play. Oh my goodness. That was a good one. That was a good one. All right, lovelies. Thank you for the donations. Thank you for supporting this work, which allows it to continue and go on. I have another live broadcast today scheduled in 5 hours from now. Oh, goodness. What is that one called? That is... Oh, it's called I'm Invisible. No one sees me. Deep Truth. Gosh, it's so good. Pre-broadcast reflection for that one is good as well. It's already written, but it goes out a couple hours from now. All right, friends. Join the community if you have not yet. And tell your friends. What a great gift. What a great free gift you can give those people you care about who are innocently and adorably confused and think they're not enough and really would like to enjoy their human experience. And they can come into this space where we hold space for love to be seen and maybe find a gentle humor about the human insanity. It's all okay. It's all okay. All right. Until next time, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. And I'll see you next time.